The cold in Montana hits different. It's not just a feeling, it's a physical thing. A slap in the face. And in November of 1884, that cold was a killer. Rowan McAllister felt it bite right through his gloves as he stepped off his horse. The old freight depot outside of Coldwater was leaning, tired, like it was ready to give up and fall into the snow. He would have ridden straight on past, headed into town, but he saw something. A shadow against the depot wall, a shape that didn't belong. He squinted, his hand moving to the Colt at his hip out of pure instinct. His heart started pounding a little harder. As he got closer, the shadow took form. It was a woman. She was tucked into a ball, arms wrapped around her knees, trying to make herself small against the wind. Her coat was thin, worn, the sleeves too short. Blonde hair, tangled and wet, was stuck to her cheeks. Her lips were blue. She looked up as he approached. Her eyes were wide with a fear that went deeper than the cold. She shrank back, like she expected him to strike her. Rowan dropped to one knee, keeping his distance. "Hey," he said, his voice gentle. "I'm not going to hurt you." Her teeth were chattering so hard he could hear them over the wind. "You're freezing," he said. He was already shrugging out of his thick duster. He wrapped it around her shoulders before she could even think to argue. The coat swallowed her small frame. "Come on, there's a fire in my cabin not 2 miles from here. You can get warm." She just stared at him. He could see her mind working, trying to figure out if he was a savior or just a different kind of danger. "I swear," he said. "I'm Rowan McAllister. I live alone. You'll be safe." She finally swallowed, a painful-looking motion in her frozen throat. "Belle?" He nodded. "Can you walk, Belle?" She tried to stand. Her knees buckled immediately. Rowan caught her before she hit the ground. She weighed almost nothing. "That's all right," he said, lifting her easily into his arms. "I've got you." His cabin was small, but it was warm, tucked away in a pocket of trees near the river. He got the fire roaring again, the flames leaping up the chimney, hungry. He brought her a thick wool blanket, a basin of warm water, and a tin cup of coffee so hot it steamed in the cold air. Belle sat on a stool close to the stove, still wrapped in his coat. Color was starting to return to her cheeks. She looked more alive than the ghost he'd found by the depot. But there was something haunted in her eyes. She kept glancing at the door like she was waiting for someone to burst through it. Or maybe she was just planning her next escape. He crouched beside her, not too close. "You hungry?" She hesitated for a long second. "Yes, thank you." He handed her a plate of beans and cornbread left over from his breakfast. She ate like a starving wolf, fast and desperate, like she was afraid someone might snatch the plate away. When she was finished, she set the plate down carefully. "I didn't mean to trespass," she said, her voice a hoarse whisper. I had nowhere else to go." Rowan sat back on his heels. "You do now." Her eyes met his, and she blinked hard, like his words were a bright light she wasn't used to. "You don't even know me." "No," he said. "But I know what it looks like when someone's been through hell. I know what cold does to a person. And I know you didn't end up by that depot because your life was going fine." She looked away at that, her lips pressed into a thin white line. "You don't have to tell me anything," he added. "Not unless you want to." Belle was quiet for a long time, just staring into the flames. When she finally spoke, her voice was a ghost. "I had 2 children," she whispered. "A boy and a girl, Abigail and Amos. We were headed west. My husband, he died in Kansas. Fever." Rowan's chest tightened. He knew that story. He knew it too well. "We made it to Miles City," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought we were safe, but I trusted the wrong man. He said he would help us, a traitor. Instead, he took my children. He sold them, like they were nothing." Rowan's fists curled into tight knots at his sides. You remember his name? Wade Keller. Rowan's head snapped up. His blood ran cold. He knew that name. Of course he knew that name. He exhaled slowly, his jaw tight. He moves between Miles and Bismarck, deals in horses, and worse. She nodded, a single tear finally escaping, tracing a clean path down her dirty cheek. I've been walking for days, following his trail, but I lost him in the snow. Rowan stood up. He walked to the wall and took down his rifle. Then we'll find him, he said. She looked up, startled, confused. Why? Why would you help me? He looked down at her, this broken woman huddled by his fire, and he saw more than just a stranger. He saw a mission. He saw a chance to settle a score he'd been carrying for a long, long time. Because you're a mother, he said simply, and because no one deserves what happened to you. He didn't tell her the rest. He didn't tell her that Wade Keller wasn't just a name to him. He was a ghost from Rowan's own past, a ghost he'd been hunting for years. Tears filled her eyes then, and she wiped them away fast, like she was ashamed of the weakness. You rest tonight, he said, his voice firm. Get warm. Tomorrow we ride. The next morning, Belle stood by his horse, wrapped in a wool scarf he'd given her. Her chin was lifted. Her hands trembled just a little, but there was steel in her eyes. You sure? Rowan asked. She just nodded. They're out there, and I will not stop until I hold them again. He gave her a small, grim smile. Then let's go bring them home. They rode west, snow crunching under the horses' hooves. The wind was sharp, but Rowan kept glancing at her. She leaned into the saddle, her hands gripping the reins, steady now. She was strong, stronger than he'd expected, strong enough to survive what was coming, because Rowan knew that finding Wade Keller was the easy part. The hard part was what came after. Wade Keller didn't work alone. He was part of something bigger, something rotten that spread its roots all the way up the territory line, and digging up those roots would get them both killed. The wind eased the farther they rode from the river. The land opened up into wide, empty grasslands, speckled with frozen brush and fence lines gone slack in the cold. By late morning, they passed a sod-roofed homestead. No smoke rose from the chimney. The windows were dark and empty. Rowan slowed his horse. Place has been empty a while. Belle kept her eyes forward, scanning the horizon. Could someone like Keller hole up in a place like that? Maybe, but he's clever. He keeps moving. Most likely he's got deals lined up between the Missouri and the Yellowstone rivers. He won't stay still for long. She shifted in the saddle. Then we'll ride longer. And they did. She didn't complain. She didn't ask to stop, not even when the sun dipped low and the air turned brittle again. They made camp above a dry creek bed, the sky bruising with dusk. Rowan gathered kindling while Belle unpacked the last of their venison. When he returned, she was crouched by a rock, rubbing her hands together, fast. You'll crack your skin that way, he said, kneeling beside her. Hold them over the fire once it's going. She blinked, then nodded. I forget sometimes what's safe and what's not. He struck a flint, coaxing a flame to life. The light flickered across her face. He saw her watching him, her expression quiet, curious. You live out here by choice? She asked. Left Virginia after the war, he said, feeding a larger branch into the fire. Too much ash behind me. He looked out at the vast, empty darkness. Came west looking for something I didn't have a name for. Her head tilted. Did you find it? He met her eyes across the small fire. I might have. She looked back at the flames, her lips parting as if to say more, but she set the pan over the fire instead. They ate in silence. When the stars came out, Rowan leaned back against his saddle. What were Abigail and Amos like? She didn't answer right away. Abigail talks in her sleep. She hums little tunes she makes up. Amos. Amos likes numbers. He counts everything. Buttons, birds, fence posts. Rowan smiled without thinking. Sounds like they've got their mother's grit. Belle rubbed her thumb over the edge of her tin cup. I braided her hair the morning we left Miles City. She wanted red ribbons. I only had brown. Rowan didn't speak. He knew better than to fill a silence that mattered. After a while, she shifted closer, her shoulder brushing his. He didn't move away. You said you came west for something you couldn't name, she said. Maybe it was this. Helping someone. He turned his head toward her. I think it was you. Her breath caught. A faint, sharp sound in the cold air. You don't know everything about me. I don't need to, he said. I know what I've seen. She looked at him then, full on, not flinching away. Her hand rested on the blanket between them, fingers pale but steady. Will you stay with me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I'm not going anywhere, Belle. She nodded slowly, then leaned her head against his chest. He wrapped his arm around her, holding her like something precious, something he'd been looking for without knowing it. The fire popped. The wind whispered through the brittle grass. For the first time in a long time, Rowan felt like the ground beneath him wasn't shifting. He felt like he'd finally stopped running. But something cold and dark in the back of his mind knew this was just the beginning. Keller was a loose thread, and pulling on it was going to unravel something much, much bigger. The trail grew clearer. On the 5th day, they reached a roadhouse south of Glendive. The innkeeper, a stooped man with a long scar down his jaw, remembered Keller. Yeah, a trader passed through 2 days ago, had 2 kids with him, paid in gold and left before dawn. Said he was heading for Fort Union. The innkeeper spat into the sawdust on the floor. Girl had a red string in her braid. The boy was real quiet, wouldn't touch his food. Rowan watched Belle's fingers press hard into the edge of the counter. She didn't speak until they were outside again. They're close, she whispered. Rowan nodded once. We'll push through the hills tomorrow. He'll cut through the timber to avoid the open roads. That night they camped near a frozen slough, the wind muffled by cottonwoods. Rowan kept the fire low, his rifle within arm's reach. Beside him, Belle sat staring into the dark. I used to make up stories for them, she said quietly. Abigail liked ones about foxes. Amos always wanted numbers in his tales. I'd say the fox had 12 apples or 27 buttons on his coat. You'll tell them more when we get them back, Rowan said. Her voice dropped. I have to believe that. You don't have to. You just have to keep riding. She looked at him then, her breath visible between them. You ever think of having a family? He didn't answer right away. I used to, before the war. Afterward, I figured it wasn't in me. He tossed a stick into the fire. But now, I don't know. Feels different with you here. Belle reached for his hand, her fingers cold but sure. We're different people than we were before. He turned his palm up, lacing his fingers through hers. I like who I am with you. She leaned gently into his side. By morning, a snow haze had settled over the hills. They rode without speaking, the horse's breath steaming in the cold air. By midday, the trees thinned, revealing a narrow shack near a creek bend. A tethered wagon sat out front. Rowan dismounted, motioning for Belle to stay back. He approached the shack slowly, rifle ready. The door creaked open. Inside, the air was foul. A man sat slumped at a table, stinking of whiskey. It was Wade Keller. Rowan kicked the man's boot. Keller groaned, then looked up, blinking. Who the hell? Rowan cocked the rifle. Where are the children? Keller's face twisted into a sneer. Don't know what you're... Rowan didn't wait. He struck him hard across the jaw with the butt of the rifle. Try again. Keller spat blood. Traded them, he gasped. To a freighter named Langtree. He was heading to Fort Buford. Rowan's voice was dangerously low. You sold them, like cattle. Keller's lip curled. Wasn't your business. Suddenly, Belle was in the doorway. Let me see him. Keller saw her and laughed, a slow, mean sound. "Still breathing? Thought you'd be dead in a ditch by now." Belle walked forward until she stood over him. "You will never hurt another child again." Keller opened his mouth to say something else, but Rowan struck him again, knocking him unconscious. They tied him to a post and left him for the lawmen in Glendive. Rowan took the wagon. Belle climbed up beside him. They rode hard toward Fort Buford. That night they made camp under a rocky ridge. As they sat wrapped in blankets, Belle turned to him. "When this is over, what will you do?" He looked at her, the firelight catching in her hair. "I'll go where you go." She reached up and touched his cheek. "And if I want to stay, I'll build you a house," he said, "with a room for each of them, and one for us." Her eyes filled with tears, but not from grief this time. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was a quiet kiss, but it was a promise. When it ended, she rested her forehead against his. "I never thought I'd find someone strong enough to carry what I carry," she whispered. "You're not alone anymore," he said. "You never will be again." She smiled then, small and fierce. "Then let's bring them home." But Rowan had a cold feeling in his gut. It was too easy. A man like Keller giving up a name? And Fort Buford wasn't just a trading post. It was a military fort, a place where a freighter named Langtree could disappear. He was beginning to suspect this wasn't just about a trade. This was about a delivery, and they were riding straight into a trap. The Missouri River was a flat gray line under a sky full of low clouds. Fort Buford was a cold, hard fact on the horizon. The wind had softened, but the chill ran deeper now, the kind that gets in your bones. Rowan guided the wagon along the rutted track, his hands steady on the reins. Belle sat close beside him, her face tight with focus. Not fear. Something else. They passed a line of supply wagons at the edge of the post. Soldiers eyed them but didn't stop them. Rowan pulled the wagon to a halt near the stables. "Langtree will be inside," he said, nodding toward the main barracks. "He wouldn't risk traveling farther until the weather breaks." Belle climbed down before he finished the sentence. "Then we don't wait." Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp wool and pipe smoke. Men were gathered in small knots, playing cards, eating stew. Rowan scanned the room. A man near the back caught his eye, tall, with a stained buffalo hide coat and a rifle leaning against his leg. "That's him," Rowan murmured. Belle crossed the floor without hesitation. "You Langtree?" The man looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Who's asking?" "I am," she said. "Where are they?" Langtree blinked, then leaned back, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Ah, Keller's freight. Thought you were dead." Rowan stepped beside her, his own rifle angled low but ready. "They're not your concern anymore." Langtree shrugged. "Didn't touch 'em. Took 'em off Keller's hands to keep the peace. They're in the back room. Safe. Don't bark at me. I'm not the villain here." Belle pushed past him and threw open a side door. Rowan kept his eyes on Langtree until he heard a cry from behind the door. Not a cry of pain, a cry of recognition. Then Belle's voice, cracked and shaking. "Abigail, Amos." He stepped back as the door opened. She stood there, her arms wrapped around both children. Abigail's braid was half undone, but her eyes were fixed on her mother. Amos just clung to Belle's coat, silent. Langtree scratched his beard. "Told you, didn't harm a hair." Rowan looked at him, his gaze level. "You'll stay out of Montana, out of Dakota, out of anywhere I ride." Langtree raised his hands. "Fine by me." But as they turned to leave, Langtree spoke again. "You know, Keller wasn't the one who wanted them gone." Rowan froze. "What did you say?" "Keller was just the delivery boy," Langtree said, his grin returning. "The real order came from higher up. A man in Bismarck, a judge. Said the children had a claim to some land he wanted. Said he needed them. Disappeared." The room went cold. This wasn't about a simple cruel man selling children. This was a conspiracy. A judge. "What's his name?" Rowan demanded. Langtry just chuckled. "Now that information's gonna cost you." Rowan raised his rifle. At the same time, Belle stepped forward, pushing the children behind her. She looked at Langtry, and her eyes were not the eyes of a victim anymore. They were the eyes of a mother who had walked through hell and was ready to burn it all down. "You'll tell us," she said, her voice low and dangerous, "or I will take you apart, piece by piece." Langtry's smile vanished. He looked from Rowan's rifle to Belle's face, and he saw she wasn't bluffing. "Fair enough," he said, raising his hands again. "No need for all that. The name's Richter, Judge Marcus Richter." Rowan and Belle exchanged a look. They had found the children, but the fight wasn't over. They hadn't just uncovered a crime. They had uncovered a war, and Judge Marcus Richter was a man who buried his enemies deep. They left Fort Buford with more than just the children. They left with a new target, Judge Marcus Richter. As they rode south back toward home, the children leaned into their mother, quiet but safe. Rowan glanced at Belle's hand, resting on the seat between them. He reached over and took it. "I think," she said after a long while, "I'm ready to plant something, to stay in one place." Rowan squeezed her hand. "I'll build us a house, near those hills with the aspen grove." Abigail looked up at them, then leaned her head against her mother's arm. Belle smiled, not wide, but deep, and for the first time, Rowan felt it too, a real, solid hope. The wind had quieted by the time they passed back through cold water. Rowan stopped the wagon at the mercantile. Belle picked out bolts of calico, a new kettle, and socks for the children. She didn't hesitate. Everything she touched with purpose. That night, they stayed in the loft above the stable. After the children were asleep in a nest of hay and blankets, Rowan heard Belle whisper his name in the dark. "I want to marry you." His breath caught. "I've lived through too much to wait on things worth having," she said. "If you feel the same, then we'll do it right. Not someday. Now." He reached for her hand under the blanket. "I do feel the same." She smiled, and this time, it reached all the way to her eyes. They were married 2 days later, under a stand of leafless cottonwoods. The preacher wore mittens. Abigail held her mother's gloves, and Amos clutched a ring Rowan had carved from a deer antler. It wasn't much, but it was everything. They rode out to the land Rowan had found when he first came west. He had always meant to build there, but he'd never known who for. Now he knew. By spring, the house was standing. 2 rooms, a sod roof, and a porch that faced the sunset. Rowan built the kitchen table himself. Belle stitched the curtains. Abigail planted sweet peas, and Amos kept a tally of their growth on a scrap of paper nailed to the porch post. But Judge Richter was a patient man. He couldn't let a loose end like Belle and her children just disappear. He sent a man to watch them, a quiet man who asked questions in town, a man who started buying up the debt on the neighboring ranches. One evening in May, Rowan found Belle on the porch steps, shelling peas, the children playing in the tall grass. "I like it here," she said. "It's better than anything I ever pictured." He sat beside her. "It feels like it was always meant to be this way." But as they watched the children chase each other, laughing, a lone rider appeared on the ridge, a dark silhouette against the setting sun. He just sat there on his horse, watching. Rowan felt a chill run down his spine. Belle's hand found his. The house was built. The family was together. But the war wasn't over. It had just followed them home. That night, after the children were asleep, Rowan and Belle lay in the dark, the window cracked to let in the night air. "You think they remember what came before?" she asked. "Maybe," he said, "but they'll carry this more." She turned to face him. "You gave me a life I didn't dare hope for." "No," he said, brushing her cheek. "You made it with your own hands. I just held the door open. He kissed her then, slow and sure, but as he held her, he couldn't shake the image of the lone rider on the ridge. Judge Richter was squeezing them, isolating them, getting ready for the final move. The next morning, the sheriff from Coldwater rode out, a grim look on his face. "Rowan," he said, twisting the brim of his hat, "Judge Richter's office filed a claim. Says your land deed is invalid. Says there was a prior claim on this parcel. He's got papers. Looks official." Rowan stared at him, his blood turning to ice. The house they'd built, the land they'd worked. It was all about to be stolen, legally, by the very man who had tried to steal her children. "He can't do that," Belle said, her voice shaking. "He can, ma'am," the sheriff said, his eyes full of pity. "And he will. You've got 30 days to vacate." The wind moved through the aspens like a hush. The home they had built was about to be torn down, and this time there was nowhere left to run. If you believe in fighting for what's right, even when the world is against you, then you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button, because stories like this are a reminder that family isn't about blood, it's about who you stand with when the storm comes. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what you would have done in Rowan's shoes. Thanks for watching.